Please. Secretary Clinton has consented to take some questions. And first of all, I want to thank you for an enormously important, but also for the work that we're doing, inspiring speech. But let me go straight to the audience and see what questions want to be raised. I was told that you've handled a great many town halls, so this group will probably be child's play for you. Please. Yes, and if you could identify yourself as well as you ask your question.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Sebastian Gorka, National Defense University, and the Strategic Advisors Group at the Atlantic Council. You've given an incredibly ambitious speech this evening, and one of the corner points was Article 5 and renewed commitment to Article 5. Given all the other challenges in the new environment, what is your expectation that Article 5, or what territorial defense actually means, has to be somehow addressed or redefined in the new strategic concept to include the things you mentioned, such as cyber and energy?
Well, thank you. I think that that's a very good way of putting the question, because we have a concept of what Article 5 collective defense means that I think has to be analyzed and considered in light of the new challenges that we confront. But I view Article 5 as at the core of the NATO promise, and therefore we have to be willing to get behind the new challenges that are posed to member states and be ready and willing and able to create not just a new strategic concept, but the operational abilities to provide that collective defense. So I'm hoping that we can get some guidance from the strategic concept, but then, I'll put in another plug for reform. We need to be marrying our capabilities and reforming our systems so that we are able to carry out these new strategic concept obligations.
Please. First, yeah, please, and then after you're done, if you'll pass back to Julian and identify yourself.
Yes, Madam Secretary, Dr. Katarzyna Pisarska, I'm the director of the European Academy of Diplomacy in Warsaw and also a visiting scholar here at SAIS in Washington. Thank you very much for your visionary speech. Thank you for acknowledging the role of Secretary Albright in the enlargement process in 1999, which I think, as you said, made NATO today what it is. My question also involves the enlargement factor. Maybe it's more specific than what you said, that yes, we need to enlarge in order to develop and in order to move forward. How would you deal with the fierce resistance of Russia to allow NATO enlargement when it concerns to Ukraine or any other country from, for example, the Caucasus? Thank you.
Well, I start from a premise that no other country should have a veto on a sovereign country making decisions about what organizations it wishes to join. NATO has a set of requirements that have to be met. Not every country that raises its hand and says it wishes to be a NATO member will either quickly or ever be admitted, but that should be a process between the country applying and NATO itself, and not be influenced adversely by anyone on the outside. And of course, individual countries have every right to decide they want to join or not. And so they make their own strategic calculus as to whether they wish to do so. But a country that wishes to join NATO has to have a very clear sense of what is required in order to meet the threshold of membership. And NATO, I think, has been successfully working with countries to try to move them to be eligible and then finally to attain membership. So I recognize the very fierce concern that is often expressed by our Russian friends. And I think one of our tasks in the next years is to convince Russia that NATO enlargement is not a threat to Russia, not the 21st century Russia, not Russia, which has a lot of other pressing needs and concerns, some of them being threats coming from other sources, certainly not from NATO. But, you know, like anything else, you can't snap your fingers and hope that it changes. But I think, you know, what President Obama did with his outreach to Russia on a New START agreement, which is being, you know, finally negotiated as we speak, and what the Obama administration did with what we believe to be a smarter, more strategic missile defense approach, the phased adaptive approach, all of that, we hope puts real meat on the bones of our argument that NATO is not a threat to Russia, and NATO enlargement is not a threat to Russia. So let us hope that they will see that, but that should not affect any individual country's either desire to or eventual membership if they meet the standards.
Madam Secretary, let me throw in a quick follow-up question on that. Can you imagine a time in the future when Russia could be a member of NATO?
Well, I can imagine it. I'm not sure the Russians can imagine
it. Julian Lindley, French, Netherlands Defence Academy and Strategic Advisors Group. The United States is very busy, Madam Secretary.
Very what?
Busy at the moment.
Busy, yes.
Worldwide.
Yes.
And what's different about this strategic concept is that for the first time, NATO must necessarily consider its role globally. Not a global NATO, but consider its role globally. What is it, given the very great responsibilities the United States has, that you critically want from your European allies over the next 10 years or so, which is the lifespan of a strategic concept?
Well, I don't want to do injustice to the importance of that question by being too brief about it, or saying something which then somebody will write and say, well, she didn't say this, so therefore we don't want it, when in fact we want to use this debate over the strategic concept to have the kind of in-depth discussion that Madeline and her colleagues on the, what's it called? The expert group, which are indeed our experts, have been engaged in by traveling throughout Europe and then coming here. So don't read anything into what I might say other than it's a few general comments. You will hear from Secretary Gates tomorrow that we really believe that reform of NATO has to be fully embraced by both sides of the Atlantic and by all members. Because we cannot operate in a world where threats are evolving as they are today with an institutional structure that can't make decisions in a timely manner and which uses up a lot of the hard-earned tax dollars of the citizens of all of our countries for bureaucratic purposes that are unrelated to strategic priorities. And you will also hear from Secretary Gates that we believe that despite the historical and totally understandable reasons why European countries have not committed on a per capita basis to a level of defense spending that we would perhaps like to see you reach, not where we are, but higher than where many of you are, that this is an area that has to be honestly discussed, because a lot of the infrastructure challenges that we're going to face with these new threats, take energy security or cyber security, are going to require more investments by member nations so that we can network through NATO. It's not going to be NATO doing it so much as coordinating and working with investments by member nations.